I stand there and I read those words and they give me chills, because that is my story and that is your story. And it is a story of patriotism. Now let me be careful with using that word, because I'm one of those people, and forgive me, because I try to resist cynicism. And we're at a time, lots of folks are cynical about politicians, and I try to resist it, but when I hear a politician talk about patriotism, I fold my arms and I listen, because I think that they're gonna start talking about patriotism in a way to put others down and lift them up. Patriotism means love of country. And you cannot love your country if you don't love your countrymen and women. Patriotism then has nothing to do about trying to distinguish yourself from your fellow Americans. It's about loving your fellow Americans. And love says that everybody has worth and has dignity. Love understands that my destiny is interwoven with your destiny. Everybody has to understand that that's what love. You can't lead the people if you don't love the people.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Cory Booker, who was raised in Harrington Park. That's in New Jersey, living his life as a proud New Jerseyan. After graduating from Northern Valley Regional High School, Booker received his undergraduate degree from Stanford University, where he played on the varsity football team. While at Stanford, he was also awarded a Rhodes Scholarship and went on to study at the University of Oxford, where he received an honors degree in history. Cory Booker then completed his education at Yale Law School, receiving a JD in 1997. After law school, he moved to Newark, where he still lives to this day, and started a nonprofit organization to provide legal services for low-income families and help tenants take on slumlords, improve living conditions, and stay in their own homes. At the age of 29, Mr. Booker was elected to the Newark City Council from the city's Central Ward. In the 17 years since, Booker has worked tirelessly at the local and national levels to improve the lives of New Jerseyans and Americans. Starting in 2006, Booker proudly served as Newark's mayor for more than 7 years. During his tenure, the city entered its largest period of economic growth since the 1960s. In addition, overall crime declined and the quality of life for residents improved due to initiatives such as more affordable housing, new green spaces and parks, increased educational opportunities, and more efficient city services. In October 16, 2013, Cory Booker won a special election to represent New Jersey in the United States Senate. On November 4th, 2014, Senator Booker was re-elected to a full 6-year term. As New Jersey's junior senator, Cory Booker has brought an innovative and bipartisan approach to tackling some of the most difficult problems facing New Jersey and our country. Senator Booker has established himself as an innovative and bipartisan problem solver, committed to developing collaborative solutions that address some of our most complex challenges. Whether it's advocating for more federal resources to modernize New Jersey's transportation system, securing funds to continue the long recovery from Superstorm Sandy, or ensuring that our communities are safe from the effects of pollution and climate change, Senator Booker has proven his steadfast commitment to standing up for what matters most to New Jerseyans. Booker has also emerged as a national leader in the congressional push for common sense criminal justice reform, advocating for front-end sentencing reforms, pushing for banning of juvenile solitary confinement in federal facilities, and spearheading legislation to make the hiring process fairer for formerly incarcerated. Senator Booker has also partnered with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to create a number of economic proposals, from increased small business investments to entrepreneurship programs with the hope of fostering greater economic mobility and opportunity for individual Americans. Senator Booker currently serves on the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, the Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. Senator Booker is the ranking member of the Senate Subcommittee on Surface Transportation, Senate panel responsible for overseeing Amtrak and passenger rail in the United States. And perhaps one of the most impressive things to me that I heard today that I did not know is that Cory Booker's family is from my hometown, Hendersonville, North Carolina. So without further ado, Senator Booker.
Would you all give, first of all, it's a difficult thing for this dais to have two bald brothers sitting next to each other like this. Some people, I saw you all mixing me up. Some people came up here, called me the professor, called him the senator. But would you all give it up for him doing a great job as an MC today? And Dr. Ruth, I just want to say to you, thank you for your leadership as executive director. Thank you for leading during difficult times. Sometimes it's easy to lead when things are going well, but it's harder to lead when you're facing headwinds, you're going up the rough side of the mountain, and you're facing challenges. So thank you for your leadership. And I do want to say, you got to give another round of applause when people stand up here and say, I've been brought from the projects to the executive suite. And would you please give her another round of applause and just give her love for that. So look, I apologize in advance because I may be the United States Senator from New Jersey, but you have to understand when I am here in North Carolina, I feel at home. And you know how sometimes you come home and you unbuckle your belt and you get a little loose? And so for those of you who are expecting a senatorial formal address, I can't give that to you in a place where I feel at home. And I'm really in trouble because you know how sometimes family can be, right? So let me just tell you, I've been running around this last week, getting busy, crazy, sitting in classified briefings, trying to battle back changes to the EPA and all kind of tough stuff. And I forgot before I got here to call my family and tell them I was coming. Oh, hold on, you don't know the half of it. So I land about 2 hours ago and I called my aunt and uncle up and I said, and they're happy to hear from me. And I'm like, I'm in North Carolina, and I thought the phone might have dropped. They live in Fayetteville, 90 minutes away, and I gave them 2 hours. And you know what they did? They showed up. And so I just need to ask them to stand. This is my father's brother, my Uncle Sonny, my Aunt Nita, he married up. And my cousin, Jay. Give him a round of applause. Jay and I used to hang out when I was young. I was the awkward teen, he was the pretty one. But I'm so happy they're here. I just want to speak from the heart today. There are a whole lot of issues going on. But you all, I said I feel at home, and I want to approach my remarks in a way that you might not expect. Because I really want to talk about values, and I want to talk about three in particular of the base values of the NAACP, of the base values of the United States of America, of the base values of we the people. And the three values I want to talk about, many of you know, it is faith, hope, and love. Now, I want to do that in my own order. I'm going to talk about faith first, and love second, and hope last. And allow me to talk about faith first, because I got a call in my office. In fact, actually, I was in the cloakroom of the United States Senate between votes, and my phone rang, and the caller ID said, "The Reverend Barber." And you have to understand, I am a guy that sometimes when it's dark, I look for guiding lights. And I've got lots of guiding lights in this country, people who sustain me. I got one right in the Senate named John Lewis. And he's right over on the other side of the Congress in the House. You got one that gave me from the state. He was my chairman when I first arrived, named G.K. Butterfield, one of my guiding lights. But all across America, there are really impressive people. From Jeffrey Canada up in Harlem, to Brian Stevenson down in Alabama. But I want you all to know that one of the people that sustains me, inspires me, and probably more important than sustenance and inspiration is that he challenges me, calls to my conscience to be a better man. And that is Reverend Barber. And so I don't care if I'm on the Senate floor in the midst of the debate. If my phone buzzes and I see it's Reverend Barber, I try to do everything I can to answer that call. And in our entire relationship, he's never asked me for anything. He informs me of things. He tells me about things. He calls me up and lets me know what's happening. But this is the first time he said, "Hey, Cory, I am bringing together some activists, and it is my last time when I am going to be head of the NAACP. It's my last gathering. Would you be the final speaker?" Now, we don't let you politicians come and speak often. He said, "But I would like for you to come." And I didn't even check my schedule. I just said, "Yes, sir. And I want you to know that I am here because of him, and he brings me to my first value, which is the value of faith. Because he is one of my guiding lights of what it means to be faithful." Now, forgive me, I know that the NAACP, founded by Christians and Jews, I know that this is an eclectic group of people of all different backgrounds. But allow me for a second to tell you that I have a strong conviction about faith. And I'll say it to you right now. I tell people, before you tell me about your religion, show it to me in how you treat other people. Because we all know folks that can preach right, but then they walk left.
Come on here.
People think that faith is somehow a passive word, that prayer is something that is about being motionless. Let me paraphrase Frederick Douglass. He said, "I prayed for years for my freedom, but I was still a slave. It wasn't until I started praying with my feet and praying with my hands that I found my salvation." Prayer necessitates sacrifice. It necessitates work. It necessitates struggle. You all know what it says. It says faith without works is? Thank you very much. I know where I am now. But some people don't understand. I read in the Bible. Faith the size of a mustard seed. What can you do? Move mountains. But people misunderstand that, and they forget the next verse down that talks about sometimes you got to fast and pray. You know, I was taught that I can do all things. Philippians 4:13. But God doesn't strengthen you to sit on the couch. Come on now. We have to understand that we can't get caught up in a state of sedentary agitation. When we're so upset about what's going on in the world, then we fail to understand that we are the instruments. Let me get in trouble right now. And I have some trepidation about doing this because I'm looking to my left and folk are filming me. And maybe I could try to appeal to them to turn off the camera, but CBS here says no. But let me just tell you this, and then I'm gonna be done with faith. I want to make this point. And this is an apocryphal story. But let's just say there's a church in Newark, and there was a pastor who had two young boys that were cutting up all the time. And he couldn't get them to behave. He asked the head of the deacons, "Can you get them to behave?" And the deacon tried to talk to the two boys, but next Sunday in church, they're messing up, cutting up. Kind of like Jay and I used to do. And then he says, well, the deacon failed. Let me get the head of the choir. Because a strict head of, you all know some of the choir directors, like the strict man. He talked to them and they tried to get them to behave. They kept cutting up the next Sunday in church. And finally the pastor thinks to himself, well, I got to do something about this. I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And he brings the young boys to his office. He sits the younger one outside of the office, brings the older one into his office, and he sits him down. And the young boy is so disrespectful to the pastor. He's got his arms crossed. He's just staring down that pastor all mean. And the pastor's thinking to himself, oh my gosh, everybody else failed. I got to think of something different. And then he notices his Bible sitting over there on the right, and he puts his hand on the Bible. And then he just utters in his baritone voice, lowly, he just says, my son, tell me right now, where is God? And the boy, his eyes shot open. He grabs onto the armrest and he's snapped to attention. And the pastor, I don't know what kind of church you all go to. I go to Metropolitan Baptist Church. My pastor, when something's working, he just doubles down on it. It's something working now. And so he holds up the Bible and he looks at the boy and he says, my son, I don't know if you heard me, but tell me right now, where is God? And now the boy starts shaking from head to toe, just shaking. He's got no disrespectful demeanor whatsoever. He's just looking at the pastor's eyes wide open, and the pastor decides to stand up before the boy, looming over his desk, and he decides to use his Sunday sermon voice. You know, the voice that can take a one-syllable word and pull it out to 5 or 6 syllables. He says at the loudest height of his conviction, he says, my son, tell me right now, where is God? And at this point, the boy stands up. He runs past the pastor, runs out the door, sees his little brother sitting there, grabs him by the hand and says, man, we got to get out of here. God is missing, and the pastor thinks we took him. Y'all don't know. I'm serious now. Y'all don't know how much in recent months people have been asking me, where's God? I'm looking around, what's happening? Where is God? But you all know the question is not where is God? The question is where are we? God calls on us. This nation calls on us to be faithful. But faith is not something that is internal. Faith has got to be an external manifestation of your beliefs. And the reason why I called Reverend Barber's name is because I have seen his faithfulness. I have seen his work. I have seen his sacrifices when they were trying to take away health care from 40 million Americans. It was a hot day this summer. And I was outside. Why? Because Reverend Barber told me to be outside. I'm out there, people in shorts and t-shirts. I'm in my suit, and I don't sweat. I pour. Reverend Barber's out there too, and I'm looking at him. He's not complaining. He is in a suit, and he is sweating. And this man, with his moral creativity, brings a coffin out in front of the Capitol and stands there with other activists, and he shows his faithfulness, because faith ain't easy. We have come this far as a nation by faith. And we now more than ever need people that understand that in this nation now more than ever, that is what we need. But we need something else now. We need something else. Look, I'm happy that my family's here. And by that I mean not just my literal family, my Uncle Sonny, my Anita, not just them. I look around this room and I know that you are my family, because I learned very early from my parents that family is a deeper definition than just blood. Sharing DNA is a nice thing, but that don't mean family. That's why on Mother's Day, if you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, I don't just say to all the moms out there, I say to all the people that bring the mothering spirit, regardless of biology, to our children. Yes. My parents met in Washington, D.C. My dad, on their first date, took my mom out to the paddle boats in the water right in front of the Jefferson Memorial. And my dad, my Uncle Sonny and my dad, they could write a book about how to woo women. That's why my Uncle Sonny married up, so high up, his nose started bleeding. And my dad was smart to bring my mom out in the middle of the water because he knew if things went wrong, she couldn't get away. She's not gonna jump out the boat. But I mention that because I love at night to go to the Jefferson Memorial. Now, I want you to know I revere our founders. I revere the genius that was made manifest. But I'm also a person that believes in this nation we gotta tell the truth. Those men who wrote those founding documents put forth genius into the world, but they were mired in the imperfections, the bigotries, the sexism of the time. Now that's why our founding documents, if you read them, you see that Native Americans were referred to as savages. You see that women weren't referred to at all. And you see blacks, you all remember what Stokely Carmichael used to say constitute, I can only say 3/5 of the word. That's a slow joke, somebody was gonna get that in a moment. But I like to stand there at night and look at Jefferson's statue and give reverence. You see, we are the oldest constitutional democracy. We were the first nation to say, you know what? We're not going to found this country because we all look alike. We're not going to found this country because we all pray alike. We're not going to found this country because we all descended from the same family's tree. Even in the earliest days of our nation, multiple continents were represented by the people that were on this soil. People from North America, people from Europe, people from Africa, people from Asia. Our founders understood that if we were going to found a nation on something different, on ideals, on ideas, that we were going to put forth a great experiment to say, can this nation stand together because of the values and ideals that we put forth that are bigger than we are, because we're still mired in imperfections. Some of them savage imperfections. And so if you stand there like I do next time you're in Washington and read the words they have chiseled into the wall of the Declaration of Independence, you will know that it ends with probably one of the greatest declarations of interdependence ever uttered. That they understood that if this nation was going to make it, this nation founded differently than others, this nation that the only thing we have to bond ourselves together is not because we all look alike, not because we all pray alike, not because we all have common DNA. We are going to be held together only if we make an unusual commitment to one another. At the end of the Declaration of Independence, these men understood that if we're going to make it, we've got to make that unusual commitment to each other. And that's why the words at the end says, we must mutually pledge to each other. We must mutually pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I stand there and I read those words and they give me chills because that is my story and that is your story. And it is a story of patriotism. Now let me be careful with using that words because I'm one of those people, and forgive me because I try to resist cynicism, which is a toxic, spiritually toxic state. Cynicism is basically throwing up your hands and saying it's just so bad, nothing I can do to do anything about it. Cynical erodes your ability to see faint light amidst darkness. And we're at a time, lots of folks are cynical about politicians, and I try to resist it, but when I hear a politician talk about patriotism, I fold my arms and I listen because I think that they're going to start talking about patriotism in a way to put others down and lift them up. Oh, you're not being patriotic. You're not got a flag pin on. You must not love this country. You're not being patriotic. You're taking a knee when others are standing. Patriotism, let's get to the root of the word, means love of country. And you cannot love your country if you don't love your countrymen and women. Patriotism then has nothing to do about trying to distinguish yourself from your fellow Americans. It's about loving your fellow Americans. And love says that everybody has worth and has dignity. It's about looking at someone and understanding that love understands that my destiny is interwoven with your destiny. It's not about you being less or lesser than me. It's me understanding that I am invested in you, that if your children fail to succeed, I am bereft of their genius, of that teacher, of that biologist, of that artist, of that poet, of the mean man on the horn over there. Everybody has to understand that that's what love. You can't lead the people if you don't love the people. Now, the reason why I went from faith to love is simply this, because this is our story. This is my story, and I want to tell you the truth. I've listened to this story since I was a child. My parents wanting me to understand that this themes of rugged individualism, themes of self-reliance are important in our country. But we know that rugged individualism didn't get us to the moon. We got there together. We know rugged individualism didn't overcome slavery. We got there together. We understand that we've come from a country that says that African ideal, we make real in our country this ideal that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And so this is our story. It's my family story. It's my North Carolina story. My dad was born in the mountains of North Carolina in an amazing town called Hendersonville. Go ahead. And he was born poor. Now let me tell you something. If my dad was right here, he would be heckling me from the back, saying, don't tell those folk from my home state that I was poor. Tell them the truth. I was po, P-O. I couldn't afford the other two letters. I was a po boy from North Carolina. I couldn't afford it. I didn't do well in school when I started out because I was so poor I couldn't pay attention. That's another slow joke you'll get in a minute. Yeah, listen, you grow up with my daddy, his stories, the older I got, the worse his childhood was. I mean, the hail started out the size of golf balls, and every sport was represented. Eventually, we got like beach balls and soccer. It just got bigger and bigger till it was the size of Cadillacs. And I know the Bible says, thou shalt honor thy mother and father. But one day my dad started a story. He goes, son, let me tell you about when the tsunami hit my town. And I'm like, Dad, you're from the mountains of North Carolina. There's no way a tsunami hit your town. And I know you all got some family like this because my dad was recalcitrant. He looks at me indignantly. He goes, boy, it happened a long time ago before the internet. You can't look it up, but it happened. But this is why love. Because my dad's mom couldn't take care of him. She got ill. Grandmama couldn't take care of him. So guess what happened? A family in the community said, that child is my child. And took my family in. Took my daddy in. Treated him like their son. Like he was a brother. This was the Pilgrim family, which is my family, and that's who's sitting at that table. And my dad and my Uncle Sonny, I'm glad I wasn't around in those days, because if I was hanging with them, I might not be able to be a politician today. But now Dr. Pilgrim and my dad, they did well. My father, no college tradition in my family whatsoever. But a destiny of a child was changed in the Pilgrim family. You're going to college. And when my father had difficulty getting the money together, he told me it was a church collection plate giving him some money so he can enroll in North Carolina Central University. I know there's some Eagles here. I know there's some Eagles here. And what happens when he lands in North Carolina in the 1960s? It was the same time that the sit-in movement was started where? North Carolina. And my father says he starts seeing all of these folks, North Carolinians, of all races, black and white, fighting in the civil rights movement to open up opportunity. Now let me tell you something. What's the ROI for that dollar put in a collection plate to help a child? How do you value the love of a family that took my dad in? How do you value what those folks did in the civil rights movement? I don't know how you value it, but I know what you call it. That's love. It is a conspiracy of love. When my dad graduated from college, he got to Washington, D.C. That's where he met my mom. My mom had the charity and the mercy to marry him. My dad had the luck and the good fortune, and she said yes. And remember, this was a time, I don't care what your background is, if you're Irish, if you're a woman, if you're gay, I don't care what your background is, it's probably a time that corporate America didn't want to hire you. But it was a time of activism where organizations like the NAACP, and let me tell you, there would be no me if there was no NAACP. Organizations like the NAACP, the Urban League, were challenging businesses to open their doors and hire qualified blacks. My dad was the first black man hired by IBM to be a salesman in the entire Virginia area. And when you lower barriers and give people an equal chance to compete, what happens? They do well. My dad became the top 5% of their global salesmen, gets a promotion up to New Jersey, to New York, working in Manhattan, and then he starts looking for homes to live in New Jersey, where they had great public schools. Many of them happened to be white communities. And this is 1969, 1970. Guess what happened when they went to look at a house in a white community? They were told it was sold. They were told that it was taken off the market. And they got so just frustrated and angry, but they fell into a group, another group of people, conspirators of love, blacks and whites, Christians and Jews, who formed something called the Fair Housing Council. And they decided to send test couples out right behind my parents. And when my parents were told the house was sold, the white couple showed up, and guess what? They found out it was still for sale. On the house my parents loved in Harrington Park, New Jersey, they were told it was off the market. White couple came, found out it was still for sale, put a bid on the house. The bid was accepted. Papers were drawn up. And on the day of the closing at the real estate agent's office, the white couple didn't show up. My daddy did. And a volunteer lawyer named Marty Friedman. Now Marty walks in there with my dad, and my dad said, I knew there was trouble when I walked in and I saw a dog in the corner. But my dad's like, okay, I got a lawyer, I'm just gonna watch what he does. And Marty must have rehearsed this speech for a long time, because he stood up there proudly and said, you are in violation of fair housing law. And before he could get too deep in his speech, the real estate agent stands up and punches Marty in the face, and then sigs the dog on my dad. Now let me tell you something. Every time my dad told the story, the dog got bigger. Y'all have to understand something. By the time I was in my 20s, it wasn't a dog, it was a pack of wolves, son. I fought a pack of wolves to get you in this house. After some of y'all might know my daddy, you know I'm not telling lies up here, but I'm telling you this. We moved into that town to become, like my father said, 4 raisins and a tub of sweet vanilla ice cream. And that community, still my home, they're so good. People who coached me, my teachers. But my parents did not want to let me forget that it was not presidents and senators and governors that got your family in one generation from poverty to the middle class. Right. That it was a whole lot of ordinary Americans willing to do extraordinary things, evidencing their faithfulness and their love that took my family forward. And I heard it growing up. I'm walking around my house and my dad's like, boy, don't you dare walk around this house like you hit a triple. You were born on third base. You can't pay it back, young man, even though you drink deeply from wells of freedom and liberty and opportunity that you didn't dig. Yeah. You can't pay it back, but you must pay it forward. Yeah. And so they wanted me to continue the conspiracy of love. And so I'll tell you this right now. I went through college and graduate school until my dad was tired and he says, boy, you got more degrees in the month of July, but you ain't hot. do something, serve people, help people, get out in that world, make a difference, prove worthy of your blessings. That's when I decided I was going to move into Newark, New Jersey, a community that adopted me too. Didn't care where I came from. People looked at me like I was family. Now, I'll tell you this. I ran for the city council, ran to become mayor, grassroots campaigns, incredible experiences, eventually became a United States Senator. But the painful thing I want to tell you right now is that 6 days before I was elected to the United States Senate, almost exactly 4 years ago, October 2013, my father died. Now, we've all lost people. We know death can end a life, but it can't end a love. And my mom, smart woman that she is, and my campaign staff feeling grief and a hole, they said, well, you know what we should do? The last thing we should do before you swear your oath, the last thing we should do is right before you swear that oath with Joe Biden, we're going to take you to see John Lewis. And I sat there, and he is such a powerful man, but a humble man. His office is like a museum of the civil rights movement, except for unlike a museum, he's in every picture. I don't see that when I go to museums. And he wouldn't let my mom and I get up. He's serving us food, telling me what it means to him and his struggles. That he is witnessing the fourth popularly elected African American to the United States Senate in our history. What it meant to him. And so I walk out of that office and I have my mom, this never happened before in the history of the United States, at least I don't think it had, that as a man is going to get sworn into the United States Senate, that his mother is following him the entire way, lecturing him through the hallways of the Congress. My mom was like, boy, don't you forget where you came from. Don't forget that love got you here. Don't forget that the title doesn't make the man has got to make the title. You owe a debt, young, all the way to see Joe Biden and get sworn in. I was like, get me into the Senate quickly, please. But this is what I want to end with before I shift to my last point, which is about hope. This story's not over. I went to go write a book. And you know, when you write a book, you got to fact check everything these days. So I had to do lots of research, and when it came to write the story about moving into my hometown, I had to figure out how big was the dog. So I go look for the head of the Fair Housing Council. I had to try to find this woman. Her name was Lee Porter. And she was easy to find because she's still head of the New Jersey Fair Housing Council today. She is 91 years old. Now she's not helping black families, but she understands love. We're all in this together. And now she's helping Muslim families and same-sex couples. She's bringing them all in and helping them out. And so I bring her to my office. I'm literally on my knees, and I say to her, tell me about the story of my family. She tells me the story. She confirms a lot of facts. And I go, well, I want to speak to the lawyer. And she goes, his name was Marty Friedman, Cory, but I'm sorry, he's dead. And you know what? That was like a punch in my gut. Don't worry, we don't need the light. We'll make our own. A whole bunch of luminescent people in here. I see you. And she saw me looking sad that Marty was dead, and she said, you know, all of us should be thanking people in our life before we lose the chance. But she said to me, well, you need to find the lawyer that organized all the lawyers. His name was Arthur Lessman. So I call up Arthur Lessman, and he's 84 years old, glad that I talked to him. He would pass away a couple years later. And I say to him, you know, I'm Cory Booker. He's like, I know who you are. And I go, can you tell me about what you did for my family? He confirmed stories. But then I ask him a simple question. Why would you do what you did back in the 60s and 70s? Why would you, just starting a business, take out time to help black families trying to integrate your neighborhood? And he goes, well, I remember the day that I made the decision. I go, you remember the day? Was it October this? Or no, he goes, I remember the day. It was a Monday. And I go, how do you remember it was a Monday? And he says, because Sunday I was sitting down watching TV, comfortable on my couch. And on the TV screen, I'm suddenly watching these people in Alabama trying to march from Selma to Montgomery. And as they're going over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they get stopped by Alabama state troopers with billy clubs. And I watched in horror about this going on in my country. And I was so disturbed that I got up and I went to the office the next day. My partner, I said, we got to go to Alabama. And he chuckled, not because it was funny, but because he knew we couldn't afford a plane ticket. We were just starting a business. And we sat there for a while and suddenly decided, you know what? We're not going to let our inability to do everything undermine our determination to do something. They understood that the true power of this country is not a presidential executive order. That the true power of this country is not represented in a bill or a piece of legislation. We have a saying in Washington that change doesn't come from Washington, it comes to Washington by ordinary Americans making up their mind to evidence their faith and their love and taking actions. And so they said, we're going to do the best we can with what we have where we are. And so they started calling around. Who needs some lawyers? Do a little volunteer work. They found Miss Lee Porter. And a year or two later, they get a file handed to them with Cory and Carolyn Booker on it, my parents. Now just think about this for a second. I don't know if any of those marchers knew that instantaneously their one act of righteousness, their one act of faith, their one act of love would leap hundreds and hundreds of miles and instantaneously change the hearts of two lawyers in New Jersey. I don't know if those people on the bridge would know that their one act of love, their one act of defiance, their one act of faithfulness would change, not only leap in time, space, but leaping time too, and change generations yet unborn. But that is the power of love. That is the story of our country. And I want you to know we can't fall into the trap that Alice Walker tells us about. When she says that the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place, is getting complacent, is sitting back and underestimating the power of one action. Now, I'm inspired by the folk in this room. You've been fighting a long time, but a lot of us don't understand the fight you have. I live in New Jersey. 2008, I went to go vote. The lines around my polling place. Now, I remember that day like it was yesterday, Barack Obama, I'm going in to vote for him, but I get to the end of a long line. I'm mayor of my city. I'm rolling deep. I got cops next to me. That's how I used to roll. Now I just got my friend Tamia. She is far less intimidating. And I get up there and I get up to the end of the line, and you all are so nice in North Carolina. You all treat me nice. But when I'm home, people keep it real. And I get to the end of the line, and the woman at the end of the line, she doesn't say, how you doing, Mayor? Great day, Mayor. She doesn't get intimidated by the police officer. She just looks at me and she goes, don't you think you're cutting in this line now? I don't care who you are. You ain't special. You're waiting like the rest of us. And you know what I said? Yes, ma'am. 1 year later, I go vote, and nobody is there. I walk into the polling place. It's our gubernatorial election. And I hug the poll worker because she looks lonely. I get home that night, and I see the returns come in. Our Democratic incumbent got edged out by a Republican governor. You don't know who my governor is. Y'all don't know who my governor is. And then they cut funding to Planned Parenthood. He cuts the earned income tax credit. Working New Jerseyans have to pay more in taxes. He pulls out of regional greenhouse gas agreements, and what does that mean? That my kids who have 4 times the asthma rates than in other communities face the prospect of having dirtier air. But everybody wants to come up to me. Everybody wants to say, why are the Republicans doing this to us? Why are the Republicans doing this to us? The Republicans didn't do this to us. We did it to ourselves. That's why, let me tell you right now, Martin Luther King said it. He said, what we're going to have to repent for in this day and age is not the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. The opposite of justice is not injustice. It is indifference. It is inaction. It is apathy. We have the power. We have the power of love. I don't care who is in Washington. The power of the people is greater than the people in power. But we've got to show faith. And we got to show love, and I'm ending on hope. Hope understands something. There was a North Carolina congressman. I hope you all know this history. A North Carolina congressman. His name was Congressman George H. White. You all know him. He was the last black congressman in the United States Congress to leave in 1901. And why did he leave? Why was there the disappearance? People talk about terrorism now as if terrorism in America is new. The greatest era of terrorism you all know was the terrorism of white supremacy. Thousands of Americans murdered, lynched, thousands of communities intimidated by violence, corruption, passing legislation, does this sound familiar? That disenfranchised people. And so he knew that his brethren from the South that had a darker hue were disappearing. And after he lost his election in a corrupt, unfair election day, he stood in the well of the Congress and gave his final speech. Now, I want to read you a moment. It's called the Negroes' Temporary Farewell to the American Congress. I don't know that courage. I don't know that strength to be standing in the well of the Congress at a time of rampant terrorism and death and destruction and violence, to be able to stand tall with hope in your heart and speak of brighter days. And he says that these parting words are on behalf of an outraged, heartbroken, bruised and bleeding, but God-fearing people. He talked about black folks as being Americans who are faithful and industrious and loyal people, raising people. They're full of potential and force. And if you read through this epic speech, knowing that there would not, he didn't know this, but there would not be a black person elected to Congress from the South. This is 1901. It wouldn't happen again until 1973. My dad was born here in 1936. It would be decades and decades, battles and fights, ranging from the sit-in starting in Greensboro to the marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Took decades of labor and suffering and struggle, but looking at the darkness, he still chose hope. He stood there in his final words, the last black person in the Congress for decades, stood up and said, "This, Mr. Chairman, is perhaps the Negroes' temporary farewell to Congress. Farewell to the American Congress, but, Phoenix-like, he will rise up someday and come again." You know this is the story of not black America, this is the story of the United States of America. You can try to suppress Irish in slums in New York, but they rise up. You can try to suppress women at the very founding of this nation, but they rise up. You can try to take voting rights from a people, but they rise up with hopeful hearts. You all know what Maya Angelou said: you can write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You can trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I rise. People think that hope is some feeling you get. No. People think hope is something that you got to find. No. Hope is a conviction. Hope is understanding that it doesn't ignore despair and darkness, But hope is the active conviction that says that there's no way that despair is going to have the last word. Hope says that I will be the last word. I will be an agent of hope, a practitioner of hope. And I want to tell you right now, this is why I decided to end on hope. Because I don't want anybody to leave here and say that Cory didn't tell us the truth about how tough the times are right now. I stand in a state that it is astonishing to me that right after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, fought for and bled for by thousands and thousands like my hero, John Lewis, that before the ink was dry in states like this, they were rallying around to design laws specifically determined to disenfranchise poor folk and black folk. And this isn't just rhetoric from a partisan politician. This is me as an American. When I read a federal judge who talks about them trying to disenfranchise North Carolinians and African Americans in particular with a what? Surgical precision. But that's not all. I'm here to tell you with almost an embarrassment for my generation as I look at my 80-year-old uncle. His generation, their fights and their struggles, they brought equality. They literally were narrowing the wealth gap between blacks and whites. My generation comes on board and guess what? That gap has now widened. Let me read you. A report from the Economic Policy Institute found that despite temporary gains, the black-white wage gap is larger today than it was in 1979. And researchers who did that report concluded this is because of rising unemployment, declining unionization, the government's failure to raise the minimum wage, the lax enforcement of anti-discrimination laws, and it goes on. In fact, the study isolated for all other variables and said that when comparing blacks and white men with the same education, the same experiences, and living in the same region, black men make about 22% less than white men. I'll quote it about black women. Black women make 34% less. The poverty rate among black Americans is more than double the poverty rate among white Americans. In 2013, children were close to 4 times as likely as white children, black children were close to 4 times as likely as white children to be living in poverty. But I'm not stopping there. What's my generation done to ourselves that my uncle's generation hasn't? Around 1970s, 1980s, when my team, the X generation, was coming on the scene, you all know this. Something they didn't have in my father's generation was called mass incarceration. We're unique in humanity, the land of the free. We incarcerate more people than anywhere on the planet Earth. 1 out of every 4 people on Earth and humanity that's incarcerated today is in the United States of America. 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth are here in America. And who do we incarcerate? Brian Stevenson, one of the heroes I mentioned earlier, says we have a criminal justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than poor and innocent. Please understand, we don't have trials anymore. My father, when he saw me reading 12 Angry Men, told me he acted in that play, I think in high school. He said, oh, that was great, but we don't have trials and juries anymore. 98% of our criminal convictions are done by plea bargain. And it ain't a bargain. Because of all the mandatory minimums now, a prosecutor, and I've had young people sit in my office and tell me with anguish, they said, Cory, this was the choice I was given. I did a nonviolent drug offense. Frankly, people getting convicted in this country of doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing. And here you got this young man telling me that this was the choice I was given. I could take the plea bargain and be out and free, or they would stack the mandatory minimums, put me in adult court, and I'd face 15, 20 years. What do you think kids take? The plea bargain. That's why there's a great book called, you should read it, Why Innocent People Plead Guilty. But these kids don't know that when you have a nonviolent drug conviction in this country for doing things that Congress people did, Uncle, not me, Congress people have done, for doing things that presidents have done, if you're the kid that gets caught for it, guess what happens? Felony conviction, you can't get a Pell Grant, you can't get food stamps, you can't get loans from banks, you can't get business licenses, you can't get jobs. And that's why in America, if you have a criminal conviction, your lifetime earnings sink to the ground. There's a study that came out of Vanderbilt, I think, that says we'd have about 20% less poverty in America if we had the same incarceration rates as other countries. But it's worse than this, y'all. We incarcerate women disproportionately. We incarcerate the mentally ill disproportionately. We incarcerate the addicted disproportionately. We're incarcerating so many people in this country. Over 70 million people have a criminal record. That's about a third of adults. But it's disproportionately who? People of color. There is no difference in America between usage of drugs between blacks, whites, and Latinos. 10% of Americans breaking drug laws in every category. But you know what? I went to Stanford. Nobody was stopping and frisking kids coming home from frat parties. And I'm here to tell you there's a whole lot of drug use going on college campuses. No difference between blacks and whites for drug usage or drug dealing, but if you're African American in America, you're almost 4 times more likely to be arrested for it. And so we are churning people of color into our prison systems at an astonishing rate. And what does that mean? Not just economic devastation to communities where this kind of incarceration is concentrated, but it's more than that. We lose our political power. In Florida right now, because of felony disenfranchisement, one of the most important swing states in American presidential politics, 1 out of every 5 black people has lost their right to vote because of felony disenfranchisement. And if you think that's coincidence and not by design, I beg of you, I've been challenged on this before, to read the legislative debates back in the late 1800s and 1900s when people were discussing felony disenfranchisement. You will see that in many cases it was designed to disenfranchise blacks. If we can create black codes and laws and they break these laws, then they lose their voting rights, they lose their power, and they lose their representation in Congress. And so I want to end with this last story, because I told you the darkness, and I can go on. I met with an amazing group of North Carolinians. I represent New Jersey, but I know in New Jersey, it's not just mass incarceration. It's just not just economic injustice. In my state, all over my state, I see another thing: people living in toxic environments. People think Flint, Michigan is rare. There are over 1,000 jurisdictions with children with lead poisoning in their bloods, 3 times higher than in that jurisdiction. I came down here because in New Jersey we have toxic sites. They wouldn't let me as mayor plant directly in the soil when I was creating urban farming because they said the soil is toxic. I knew the air was toxic because the asthma rates are epidemic. The water was toxic. My river in Newark is a Superfund site. Kids growing up with toxicity of their environment, air, water, soil. Well, I came down to North Carolina, met with some folks who were living in hog country, where you literally have Chinese companies in this industrial animal agriculture. I didn't believe it till I stood there with some great activists. They're coming to see me today. People like Devin Hall and Larry Baldwin and Miss Muhammad, she tough woman, reminds me of folk from Newark. Larry Cooper, these folks stood there and told me, look, come watch what they do. Hogs produce 9 times the excrement that a human being does, and they put it in these massive lagoons and they spray it over fields. And I stood there and I watched, they sprayed it over the field, but I watched that mist. You know when you do your water sprinkler? I stood there in communities, a wretched smell, and these activists told me they can't open their windows, they can't run their air conditioning, they can't put their clothes on lines, that they have respiratory diseases, cancers, and all of that. And this isn't uncommon in America. I've traveled through Alabama, I went to Louisiana to a place they literally call Cancer Alley. And so you've got injustice in the criminal justice system, injustice in the economic systems. You've got environmental injustice. I'm painting a dark picture, but I'm ending with this idea of hope because I want to tell you, we got to understand the power that we have. People getting frustrated and giving up. We were talking about this here. People get out, register to vote, go through all the hurdles, vote, and then we lose an election and folk want to give up. Well, let me tell you something. I've given an entire speech, and I haven't mentioned the name of the President of the United States.
Thank you.
And you know why?
Thank you.
Because it's not about him.
Thank you.
It's about us.
Thank you. Thank you.
We got all the power we need.
Yes, we do.
If we focus on hope, faith, and love.
Yeah.
Don't let you be one of those people that I catch calling our president nasty names. I'm serious. How could you think that you're going to beat darkness by spewing darkness? If Nelson Mandela can love his jailers, if Martin Luther King can love Bull Connor, we got to be people of love. Don't let someone twist you so much to make you hate them. Be a person that sees dignity and honor in every person. And so I end with this story of confession when I felt like giving up. A moment that I was broken, and I'm telling you, if this country has not broken your heart, you don't love her enough. There are heartbreaking things happening all over. It was 2004, I think exactly, and it was my birthday, and my dad came up to visit me, and we were just walking around my neighborhood. Now, I'm a United States Senator, but I know the people that elected me. I have a map of the Central Ward when I first got elected. New Jersey put me in the Senate, but I got my start in Newark, and over my desk in the Senate is a Central Ward of Newark, this inner city community. My neighborhood, the median income is $14,000. I still live in that community. My dad comes up, and we're walking around the neighborhood, and this is what hurts me when I see something grievous and painful like Las Vegas. It hurts me. I get angry, but I also know that collectively every day in America we have a mass shooting. So here I was in 2004 walking my neighborhood with my father, proud. My dad was striding around that neighborhood, and we hear shots ring out. I run up the hill, and you see the tail end of the shooting. Boy shot multiple times in the chest. And I don't care what movies do or whatever, but it is one of the most gruesome things in the world. I tried in vain to stop him from bleeding, put my hands on his chest, but blood was coming everywhere, foamy blood pouring from his mouth. I was shaken. Paramedics finally got there, pushed me out, but I knew this kid. I felt no pulse. I knew he was dead. I come down that hill, and my dad is there looking at his son covered in another boy's blood, and I tell my dad just to go back to where I was living at the time in these high-rise public housing projects. The head of the police department, the mayor at the time, the guy who I eventually went against in politics, but I talked to the head of the police department about this. He said, "Cory, I saw you and you looked like you were in shock. You were stuttering and shaken." I walk home, get to Brick Towers, the buildings I live in, and ride that elevator up. And these are the most painful words, some of the most painful words my father ever spoke to me. In the aftermath of this, when I open the door, I still remember he sees me looking shaken. I didn't talk to him then. I went to the bathroom, trying to scrub this kid's blood off of me. Trying to scrub his blood off. I think it was all gone, but I was shaking, and then I just broke. I was so angry. I was shaking with rage. There used to be a time when the death of a child could stop this country and they would take notice. When Mamie Till kept Emmett Till's casket open, it was national news. But my generation young boys are dropping every single day, and it didn't make a headline. Why don't folk care? I was so angry. We have a civic gospel. We believe in liberty and justice for all, but I couldn't understand why nobody was doing anything about the injustice. I tore off my clothes, I jumped into the shower, and some of you know what I'm talking about is when you turn the water on so hot, you just want the pain of the water on your skin to somehow erase the pain that you feel in your heart. And what did my dad say to me around this time? He said, Cory, I worry that a child born like me, poor, to a single mom, in a segregated community, would have a better chance of making it in America if they were born in 1936 than being born today. He was like my dad, in my moment of weakness, punched me in the gut. Made me ache from those words, because I know data. In some ways he's wrong, but in some ways the leading cause of death back then was not murder, as it is now for black boys. That 1 out of 3 back then wouldn't go to jail, like the data shows now. I knew what he was saying was almost like his anguish, that we worked so hard to make it so far. And now what's happening? Economic backslides, voting rights backsliding, violence erupting. I went to bed that night, and it's one of those nights that sleep is a merciful gift. If you could just fall asleep. I woke up that morning and I didn't want to see my daddy. I got out early, went down in the elevator, and I was coming out of the projects. And as I'm walking through the elevator, through the lobby of my building, I realized that this was the lobby where the tenant president, this amazing woman named Mr. Virginia Jones, she was the tenant president of our project. I had forgotten that in the 80s, her son was murdered in that lobby. And she never left. When I asked her about it once, I said, Ms. Jones, why do you still live here? Your son was murdered here. And she looks at me like incredulous. Why do I still live here? And I said, yeah, Ms. Jones. She goes, because I'm in charge of Homeland Security. She was one of those lights I mentioned earlier. And God has a plan. There's this idea of faith that when you come to the end of all the light you know and you're plunging into the darkness, faith is knowing one of two things are happening. You're going to find solid ground, or God will send you someone who'll teach you how to fly. And I walk out of that lobby, and there is Miss Jones standing on the other end of the courtyard. Her back is to me, and I stop. I don't say anything. I feel like I'm 100 feet underwater. And then suddenly Miss Jones turns around, and we look at each other, and I don't move, and she doesn't say a word. All she does is put her hands open like this, and I knew that was an invitation to give me exactly what I needed. And I scurried across that courtyard. Miss Jones is 5 feet and a smidgen. I'm 6'3", 250. But I ran across that courtyard like a little boy and leapt in her arms, and she held me and rubbed my back. And I let loose with tears. And then she said something to me. 2 words. And I leave them with you. 2 words that have nothing to do about religion, have everything to do about America. 2 words that are evidence of our common history. Small mountain towns like Hendersonville, low-lying areas like the activists I met with in Hall Country. These 2 words have kept us going through the darkest of times, times that would break folk but not Americans. She rubbed my back and held me like a sobbing boy, and she said the 2 words over and over again. Stay faithful. Stay faithful. Stay faithful. This is our historic organization, the NAACP. And in the darkest of times, through the most difficult challenges, the faithfulness of this organization, the faithfulness of Americans, the faithfulness, the hope, and the love, that is what makes America great. And we do live in dark times. There are challenges before us, but I am telling you right now, we in this country, who've already made it up the rough side of the mountain, who've already been forced to make bricks without straw, that we will find a way, and I promise you that we are going to make it to the mountaintop. And if we keep fighting with faith and with hope and with love, if we keep fighting with a true patriotism and a love of our country and a love of all countrymen and women, if we bound ourselves together with that kind of fight and that kind of force and that kind of faith, then we will get to a point in this country that for all people, for all of America, justice will roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Booker, for your words. I smiled when he told the story of his mother, because I had a mother of faith. And I'm talking about a mother of faith. If she was in here when the lights went out, she would have been praying, speaking in tongues. I had a mother of faith. But being faithful and being a person of faith is difficult. And most people, they quote that verse that Senator Booker referenced, that faith is the evidence of things not seen. And most people only have courage when they can see. And if you read later down in that chapter, it begins to list those people who have faith in darkness. So it said, by faith, Abel believed God. By faith, Enoch. By faith, Carolyn Coleman. By faith, Dr. Barber. And today, North Carolina wants to give an award to Senator Cory Booker for leading by faith.